Good evening all, and welcome. Is dreaming of the dead an ominous sign, or can it be one of great comfort? Only time will tell as you tune in, so get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My dad is the type of man to call bull on anything paranormal. He doesn't believe in ghosts, aliens, or anything of the sort. I tend to follow in his footsteps, and if it were anyone else, I probably wouldn't believe this story. My dad grew up in a poor, small community. My grandparents were incredibly respectful and friendly people, despite the poverty. They made friends with everyone in town and helped anyone that needed a hand. Along came a wealthy but very lonely man, Bill, who moved in next door. Over time, Bill became very close to my family. He revealed that he was estranged from his children after they tried to steal large sums of money from him. He discovered his ex-wife had been having an affair since before they got married and was simply trying to take advantage of his wealth. Needless to say, the type of help this man needed was comfort, not food, not money. Bill was over for almost every meal, and my dad began to see him as an uncle, just as my grandparents had learned of his family issues. He had noticed that my grandparents were also struggling financially. Since he despised his family, he wrote a will to give all of his assets to my family. Then, Bill passed away due to old age. As you may have expected, his children came around quickly after. They did not host a funeral service or even attend the service my grandparents funded. They were strictly in town for the inheritance. My grandparents desperately needed the cash and knew that the will entitled them to it. But there was one problem. The will was nowhere to be found. Bill hadn't told anyone where he'd left it, and the money would default to kin without it. After extensive searching, my grandparents were on the verge of giving up. The night before the final day to find the will, my dad had an eerie dream. In his dream, he woke up in bed. At the end of his bed stood Bill. Bill proceeded to speak to him and tell him exactly where the will had been left. He told my dad it was in a safe buried in the basement, in the back right-hand corner. He even led my dad to the spot, told him the combination to the safe, and showed him where it was. My dad woke up very startled and ran to tell my grandparents. With little time and nothing to lose, they checked out the spot in the basement. Sure enough, they dug in the right spot, and there was the safe. They entered the combination from the dream. The safe popped open, and the will sat inside. I often write off paranormal stories as lies, misremembered events, or something similar. I checked with all 4 of my uncles and my grandparents for their version of the story, and they all confirmed it. The first thing that several people asked was why someone would bury a will. This is typically something you don't hide. Although my dad never asked Bill directly, he speculates it was due to some mistrust in the banks. This story took place in the mid-70s, and Bill lived through the Depression. My father tells me that the safe contained more than just the will. In addition to a large sum of cash, it also contained contact information for the executor of the will and witnesses. Bill had moved from several states away, and his executor and witnesses were acquaintances from his home state. The people he chose for these roles cannot be beneficiaries of the will, and he didn't socialize with many people outside of my grandparents. Without that information, my grandparents didn't know who to contact about his death from his home estate. After Bill passed, the local court set out a date for recovering the will. Since Bill's local attorney didn't have a copy, they contacted Bill's bank to see if he had a safety deposit box and searched the house. Both proved fruitless, and neither the executor nor any of the witnesses had come forward. The deadline to recover the will was the following day, and that's when my dad's dream occurred. If the will had not been found, the court would have moved to intestacy proceedings. The court would then appoint an executor to distribute Bill's estate to his default heirs based on a state-defined formula. When my grandparents contacted the executors and witnesses, it was discovered that the executors also had a copy of the will and knew of the safe. The executor and witnesses vouched for the authenticity of the original will in the safe, but the legal battle continued. My grandparents didn't mention how the location of the safe was discovered, but they provided various evidence of the poor relationship between Bill and his kids. The kids claimed fraud, but after deliberating, the probate court ruled in my family's favor, and the will remained valid. I still find it odd that Bill would hide the will, but I think it is possible that it was put in the safe as a place to safeguard it, rather than to keep it hidden. Bill may have assumed that his executor would hear about his death right away and be able to provide the location of the safe and a copy of the will. Unfortunately, it took the opening of the safe to contact the executor. Another idea that my dad has is that the location and combination of the safe may have been told to him by Bill in the past, and it was just buried in his subconscious and he dreamt it. I must admit that was my initial thought as well. My dad told me that he never would have had such a serious conversation with an elderly neighbor. My dad was in high school at the time, so the conversations he had with Bill were light-hearted and appropriate for an elderly man speaking to a kid. The serious conversations, such as the one about Bill's kids, only took place between my grandparents and Bill. There is the possibility that my dad overheard a conversation between my grandparents and Bill, but then you'd expect my grandparents to at least remember that Bill had mentioned a safe. If my dad did put the location and combination of the safe from some distant conversation out of his subconscious at the last possible moment, well, what an incredible mind he has. I asked my dad just how much money my grandparents inherited from Bill, but he wasn't sure of the amount. After the probate court ruling, the kids didn't stick around long. They were apparently pretty wealthy themselves, and were half expecting to not receive any inheritance from their dad. They hadn't spoken in years, so I don't think they were surprised by the will. In fact, my grandparents mentioned that Bill told his kids they wouldn't be getting any of his money after they had tried to steal it from him. From pretty much the first night after my dad passed away, I started seeing him in my dreams. I didn't think anything of it at first, because I figured that's a perfectly reasonable subconscious response to losing a loved one. The weird thing, though, was that he looked seriously real. Everything else in my dream would have that strange cartoonish vibe to it. Yet, I could look at my dad and count the individual hairs on his moustache and on his head. In one of the dreams, I became lucid and realized I was asleep. I asked my dad point blank, "Are you visiting me? Or is this just a figment of my imagination? I need to know." He smiled, hugged me and said, "I'm here with you right now, son. and I always will be. I love you. I woke up suddenly, and as I did, I saw a very light shadow. Had it not moved, I wouldn't have seen it. It was a head and shoulders leaning through the doorway and into my room. As soon as I saw it, it quickly moved away and backed out of the room. Somehow, it was calming rather than scary. It was absolutely amazing, because that's exactly what my dad used to do when I was little, when he left really early for work. He'd pop his head in and say goodbye. The way this shadow moved was exactly the same, and I'm convinced it was him checking in on me. If that wasn't strange enough, my mum called me downstairs that same morning. She tells me to go into the living room, and I look at the floor. I go in, and guess what? Dad's reading glasses had somehow ended up slap bang in the middle of the room. That 110% confirmed it for me. My father passed away in 2016, and I had been struggling with depression, other issues, my path in life, and trying to figure everything out for myself. I was 22, and probably the only person in my family that was mentally prepared for what had happened. I'm not really a religious person, and had no higher power to pray to, and no elders left in my line of life to ask for advice. One night, I was exhausted and completely drained of all my energy, so I decided to call it a night early and go to sleep. Exhausted, I don't remember going to sleep. I found myself waking in the hallway of his old house, right next to his room. This is the room I sleep in now. I swung the door open, and to my surprise, it wasn't my stuff around the room. It was his, but it was all different in some way, like it had been crafted perfectly. He was sitting on his bed watching an old Western movie, one I'd never seen, and I did my best to watch them all with him, so I wasn't sure how I didn't know this one. He was laughing and having a good time. The room was really bright. It hurt my eyes to look at everything. I was so confused. I did what I always did and went and sat across from him under his bedroom window. He always had an extra armchair for anyone who could come over and to have a conversation with him. All of my siblings' friends grew up in a rough spot, so everyone came to him for fatherly advice because he always knew just what to say. I stared at the TV trying to recognize the movie. I couldn't. I heard children laughing outside his window. I turned to look out, and I couldn't see anything. I was blinded by a radiant, warm white light. He stopped laughing and looked at me and said, "You can't see it, because it's not your time yet. But know it's beautiful, kiddo." I broke down crying, and asked him where I was and why I was with him. He said, "I brought you here because I know you're struggling, and you need to know for sure." He looked so different from when I'd seen him in his final days. He was warm, happy, and healthy. Healthy like I'd never seen him before in my life. Puzzled and sobbing, I looked at him and asked him, "What should I do with my life? What should I focus on?" He told me, "You need to focus on yourself and do right by your lonesome first." I understood, nodding at him. We talked for a bit about life, and then he looked away from his movie. "Why don't you get us something from the corner store like old times?" I wiped the snot from my nose and the tears from my face, and said I would be back with the junk I could carry. I happily jumped out and walked out of the room and into the doorway. He said, "Don't look back. Just keep walking forwards till you head outside, but make sure you close the door all the way." Confused, I did what was commanded, and shut his bedroom door and started walking down the hallway of his old place. Confused, I could still hear him talking, echoing through the hallway. "Keep walking, you'll make it back just fine." It was getting darker and darker as I reached the front door, excited for candy and junk food with my pops, just like when I was a kid. I sprung the front door open, only to be blinded by the same white light I couldn't see. I immediately awoke, gasping for air and crying. I attempted to get out of bed and got tangled in the blankets and fell, still crying and freaked out by what had just happened. I quickly ran to the shower and took all my clothes off and hopped in and turned the hot water on. I was trying my best to compose myself and stop crying. My body was flush with emotions. I stayed in the shower for a while, trying to get a grip on everything. Eventually I got out and went back into my room that was once his to get dressed. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted his old radio. I never really listened to the radio much. I'd been a huge punk rock fan and kept my own genres. I decided to turn it on, and as soon as I did, Simple Man by Lynyrd Skynyrd came on, and I had never heard this song before that moment in time, and it messed me up royally. I instinctively started crying again once I heard the lyrics. My old man was finishing our talk through music, the kind of music he liked to listen to. Since that day, I've done my hardest and put myself out there in the thick of it. I've asked one of my friends out, and he said yes. We've been dating for a few months, and it's looking really good. I took up leather crafting as a hobby, and really enjoyed it. I also got a raise that's almost doubling my pay, and I get to relocate to a new city soon. Someplace I've never been, and I've been listening to all kind of music I wouldn't have thought twice about listening to before, along with saving for a new hobby, the cello. Since then, I haven't questioned the spirit world. It exists. I was there. I know some people don't believe in gods, and I'm one of them. But I know what world exists, and it's one with our own. I am a sleepwalker and talker. When I get stressed out, I tend to sleepwalk more. But it's a pretty solid thing that my family and roommates are aware of. I've always had bad dreams. I woke up in terror most nights and would scream in my sleep. The most recent bout of sleepwalking has been strange. When things happen, I don't really remember them. At the moment, I'm living with my parents and sister in my family home. So about 3 weeks ago, I apparently rushed out to my mum's as she left for work and slammed on her window. I thought she was stealing her own car. Then 4 days ago I went into my mother's room and woke her up asking why she didn't have a nose. When I was younger I remember an event. I did not think it was real, but last night I found out it was real. I'm from New Zealand, and we have the Maori culture. The weapon of a Maori male warrior is a patu. It's kind of like a clubbed-shaped bone or jade-carved handheld weapon. In my childhood, I distinctly remember walking out of my room and into the kitchen for a glass of water. As I rounded the corner, there was a Maori warrior, complete with flax skirt, full facial tattoos, and a patu, making the dominance gesture, which is poking your tongue out and making an oof sound. I froze and screamed and closed my eyes, and he was gone. I always thought that this was some kind of crazy dream, or my sleepwalking delusion. Last night, me at 30 years of age, I got up and walked through my house into the kitchen, rounded the corner, and what did I see? The same warrior making faces and threatening me. I kind of froze, dropped my cup, and closed my eyes. When I opened them, he was not gone. He had in fact gotten closer to me, making very threatening sounds and looks. I sort of stifled a scream and backed up to the door to the hallway. I opened the door and slammed it and stood behind it. I woke up my sister, and she came out of her room and was yelling at me about making noise while she was asleep. I couldn't form a sentence. I just pointed to the door. She shoves me out the way and opens the door. And wouldn't you know it, the kitchen was empty. I don't know if I was sleepwalking or if the Maori warrior is part of the spiritual house I live in. When dreams become reality, it will always be scary. Last year in June, my grandmother was diagnosed with terminal cancer. It was everywhere, even in her eyes. She was fading fast and said to my father, "I'm ready to go. I want to say goodbye to the kids." Panicked, he called his brother and my mother. My parents are separated, and explained to them what was happening, and to bring my cousins and myself there the next day. The next day we visited her in the hospital, spoke for a bit, though it was really hard. That was the last time I ever hugged her and told her how much she meant to me. She died the very next day. I was on the phone with my father when it happened. I could hear the flat line in the background before he swore, hanging up. They tried reviving her, but she wasn't coming back. She was gone. A couple of months later, after the funeral, I was content in my bed, dreaming I was at my aunt's house. But then it changed. I was on the phone talking to someone, but I could see them. It was Grandma. "Are you okay?" she asked me. "I'll see you next month." I woke up confused and told my mother about this. The next day at work on her lunch, my father called her. They were having a memorial to bury my grandparents' ashes in my grandpa's hometown the next month on their wedding anniversary. Here's where it gets even weirder and sadder. That day, as a final personal goodbye, I sang to them the song Southern Cross by Crosby, Stills and Nash, a song my parents sang to me when I was little, that my grandparents sang to me sometimes too. A few days later I was dreaming again, that I was reorganizing my bookshelves and my cell phone went off. I answered it, and it sounded like a party on the other end. And on the other end were Grandma and Grandpa together, telling me they were all right and that they were happy now. In the dream I started crying, and they started singing Southern Cross. They paused only once to ask me to sing with them. That was the last time I ever dreamt about them. When I woke up, I was crying the last of the song's words dying on my lips. I never told anyone except my mother about this. Turns out a few days prior, she'd seen a figure sitting on our couch. A big figure. We think it was Grandma. I like to think they still come and visit every now and then. In June 2016, someone I hardly knew passed away, weirdly at 2 a.m, which was the time she was shot. I had a terribly strange feeling. I couldn't sleep or calm down. I had no idea who she was or anything. I'd only seen her once. The next day I found out she'd passed. I remember thinking, her name is so familiar, and her death suddenly affected me greatly. For a while after that, I saw her in my dreams. I heard some knocking at the door late at night, but no one was there. My dog looked at the door before the knocking ever happened, but there was no person or animals in sight. Now this is where it gets weird. I went for a jog at midnight to a Catholic school down my block where I pray at a statue at. I prayed for her and my normal prayer. I wanted to continue running, but my dog randomly started limping, so instead, I returned home and went into my yard. I was sitting there. No one moved. But my neighbor's outdoor light randomly turned on when I was thinking about her. The next day, I found out that someone was shot at 12:30 a.m. at the exact spot I would have been if I'd have continued my jog. This happened the day after she passed, when it was starting to greatly affect me. I had a dream I was at the location she was shot at, and I was looking for her in a panic. When I saw her, she was wearing the same outfit she passed in. I told her, "You need to get out of here. Someone is coming with a gun to kill you." She hugged me and said, "I know. Don't worry. Everything will be okay." I said, "How would everything be okay?" And I think she just said, "Don't worry. You'll see." But I can't remember that part clearly. This was so long ago, I can't remember every dream, but I just remembered this one. I woke up early one morning. I was half asleep on my bed, and I was worried about something I couldn't remember what. I remember, and I wasn't fully asleep, but my eyes were closing, and I remember she sat on my bed and placed her hands on my arm. She sang, "Just close your eyes. The sun is going down. You'll be alright. No one can hurt you. Come morning light, you and I will be safe and sound." If that song sounds familiar to you, it's because Taylor Swift sang it. The only weird part is that I'd never heard it before. That night, I was on YouTube and found a video of the girl who passed popped up. It was a cover of her singing that song, and the last dream I remember related back to that song. For some reason, I was worrying about the afterlife and what would happen. Before I went to sleep, I prayed for some sort of sign. In my dream, there was a bright light, and I heard someone sing, "And I know you'll take my hand and come to where I am, here where no one can hurt you, here where no one can hurt you, and I know you'll see the light and come to where I am." When I woke up, I searched those lyrics to see if it was maybe a song I heard her cover of Safe and Sound mentioned previously popped up, but those aren't the lyrics. I know this all sounds crazy, but it's true. I grew up in a relatively small Midwest town, so when someone went missing, it was big news, and everyone would talk about it. A while back, a 13-year-old girl wound up missing, and it was all people were talking about for a few weeks. We were the same age, just went to different schools, so it hit close to home for me especially. A few days after her disappearance was in the news, I started having these vivid dreams where I felt that I was living first person in this girl. I never saw what I looked like, I just knew I was her. I would always be in the same dream, where this couple that lived a couple of blocks away from my actual house would drive up and grab me as I was walking and shove me into their car. The dreams were extremely graphic, and I always ended up being thrown into a ditch about a mile away from the house. I would wake up screaming, and it even got to a point where I didn't even want to go to sleep and would pull all-nighters because I was afraid of having the same dream again. The dreaming went on for maybe a week or two, and then it suddenly stopped. A few days after they stopped, the authorities found the missing girl's body sadly. She was found in the same ditch I'd dreamt, exactly in the same spot, only a mile from my house. It still kind of creeps me out, and I kind of feel guilty for never telling the authorities about the couple in my dream, or about the ditch where the girl was found. But I genuinely thought they were just nightmares from all the talk in the town, and even after they found her, I didn't want to waste the authorities' time with speculation. I'm normally a pretty skeptical person, but I still can't explain this. I am now 25, in middle school, and I became best friends with a boy, James, and a girl, Dee. These kids were my lifeline in a dark time in my life, and I cannot stress enough how much I needed them then. I thought of them as my brother and sister. I thought we would be friends forever. We planned our lives on how we would buy a farmland with 3 houses and live our happy lives. But that wasn't in the cards. James and Dee had a big falling out the first year of high school. I remained friends with both, but James purposely distanced himself from me as high school progressed. James fell in love and married barely out of high school. Senior year 2012, Dee died a violent and premature death in a car crash, and it wrecked me. I mourned for years, memorized her in 2 tattoos, and felt/feel her presence in multiple ways, and feel as if I can call out to her and still reach her. And the song that we last listened to frequently on the radio is When I Think of Her. I dreamed a year or so back of seeing her again. I was 100% in this reality in the dream. I was shocked she wasn't dead, and she offered an excuse as to why she faked her death. We spoke throughout the dream and caught up on our jobs and lives. She was more mature, more slender, still had the same hair, braces gone, tattooed, now a woman like me, and not forever 17. But I woke up back to reality, and she was still 17 and in an urn. What happened to James shocked me. We were no longer friends, but we kept each other on social media after he added me very shortly before what was to happen. Last year, near Christmas, the healthy 24-year-old suffered his very first seizure and died that night. His young wife left a widow. It seemed to be a complete shock to everyone in his life. It turned out he had an undiagnosed heart condition. I felt immensely sad by his tragic passing, and lost life, but did not attend the funeral, as I felt it wasn't my place. I never felt James's presence, nor have I called out to him, but I did mourn him. The James everyone talks about on his Facebook page is a tall man with a deep voice and a goofy sense of humor. The James I knew was a little boy. The 3 of us did not feel so little at 12, but from my current perspective we were very little. The James I knew was a kind, hard-working and stand-up boy. Our first interaction before becoming friends in 7th grade was in 6th grade, with him scolding someone and defending me from another kid that was bullying me. Don't make fun of the new girl, then meeting me with a soft smile. He rode his bike 20 to 30 miles around the city of Phoenix to meet Dee and I while we were lazy and took the bus. Leaving my neighborhood to drive to work yesterday, I noticed a familiar bike with features I remember on his bike, like the bars on the back wheel, where his little brother would stand while holding his shoulders to hitch a ride. I think nothing of it, until I notice other features of the rider. A young kid, perhaps 13, with shaggy brown hair, around 3 inches from his shoulders, just like he had in middle school. A baseball cap like the 3 of us would wear, a baggy t-shirt and jeans like he would wear. And this kid looked at me for a solid second, though I had only moved and glanced at him, and observed that I could not see a figure on this rider that wasn't a childlike version of James. I turned out onto a main road, and he turned and began heading the same way. I got stuck at a light about 2 blocks down, and the kid was still riding in my direction. And at this moment, now he would ride up closer and I would be able to get a look and see that it wasn't him. I had an intuition that if I looked away he would be gone. I directed my attention to the road and looked back in my rearview mirror, and sure enough, he was no longer visible. Last year, we had a student in my grade at high school die in a car accident with his mother. I'd never heard of him or met him. I didn't know until school the next day. That day, I woke up exactly an hour before my alarm, and I saw a shadow in front, blocking my digital alarm clock. I blinked and he was gone. Then in the hallway I heard a loud and very panicked, "Mummy?" School was silent, and they did an announcement explaining what had happened. I went out of class, sobbing, and I felt like it was affecting me, more than it should have, especially since I didn't know him. But when I told others about it a week later, as I didn't want to throw salt on an open wound, they didn't question me. I don't know if his spirit was going to different places searching for his mother's spirit, or if he only appeared to people who could be considered mediums. This happened to me a second time too. Although it was before this, I had a cousin who lived in North Dakota, and it was blizzarding. He got in a car crash, and the other car that killed him was actually his brother. Of course, it wasn't intentional. Because of the blizzard, neither of them could really see. But it made the situation even more traumatic for my family. It had been literally years since his death. I had a very vivid dream of him in my mum's room, talking to her. He looked like he had aged, like the age he would have been had he not died. I was a little girl again, acting the way I always did to try and impress him. He told me he was there to babysit me, and I was so happy he was there. When I awoke, I cried, because the last thing I said to him all those years ago was that I hated him. I felt like he turned up to tell me that he forgave me. I told my mum, and she cried too. That day I had the dream was his brother's birthday. His brother just moved to the same state as me, and I'm convinced his spirit was coming down from North Dakota to go with his brother, and stopped by with me to tell me he forgave me. This is my mum's experience, not mine. My mum's brother died because a drunk driver ran a red light and hit him, causing a crash. The crash cut his jugular vein, and he died later on the way to the hospital due to excessive blood loss. My mum said a couple of weeks after her brother's funeral, she woke up in bed to him standing at the foot of it. At first it was just this abnormal bright light. Then it took a human shape, then shifted into her brother. He looked at her and smiled and told her, "Louise, promise me you'll always be a good girl and never give up." My mum replied, "I promise." He said, "I love you," then faded back into this light and was gone like it never happened. When my mum tells me this story, she always said that it had to be some vivid dream she had. She's a huge skeptic, but I've always awed this in this story. If anyone's wondering, according to my mum, the drunk driver who killed her brother was only charged with a DUI. The guy continued to drive under a DUI suspended license and caused 6 other drunk driving accidents. If I remember correctly, he was the cause of death for 3 people, one of which being a little girl under age 5. The 6th incident killed him. I don't remember how though. How he got away with it for so long, I'll have no clue. My mum said he was the most hated in the town she lived in, and every time he got out of jail, he'd just do the same thing again. It's a shame that so many had to suffer because of his selfish actions. My dad once told me that when his father passed away, he had put his ashes in the closet because he wasn't ready to spread them yet. Gramps wanted to be spread on our land, by a big tree by the lake. My dad said that he must have waited too long, because one night he was asleep, and out of nowhere he woke up to the feeling of two icy hands around his ankles, and before he could freak about that part, those hands jerked his ass about halfway off the bottom of the bed. For some reason he immediately knew it was his father, assuming it was because he was so abusive to my dad when he was a child, and it seemed like something he would do, and he went to spread the ashes the next morning. Never had another issue, although they also don't have any more human ashes in the house. Right after my love of my life girlfriend died in an accident, I experienced something I still can't explain. Literally one day after, I was laying in my bed on my back, with my head facing the Polaroid pictures of her that I still had hanging on my wall. I was just dozing off to sleep when I said in my own head, "Janine, I still love you. I miss you. I hope you're here." Right after that, I felt the end of my bed sink down by my right foot, like what happens when someone sits on your bed. Then I could feel what seemed like someone crawling on their hands and knees. I have a very big bed, and they were coming towards me. When whatever was in my bed with me reached me, I felt this weight on my chest like someone was laying on it, with their head right next to mine, just like how my girlfriend used to lay on me. All of this happened with my eyes closed, and I know I was half asleep. So it could have been a dream, but there was something so comforting about this presence, so calming, so soothing, like I'd never been more at peace in my life. Then my dad called me. As soon as the phone rang, the weight immediately lifted off my chest, and the feeling of immense relaxation was gone. That wasn't very long ago, a few months ago actually, so it's all very fresh in my mind. To this day, I still think she was saying goodbye to me, and I have not experienced anything like that day since. I hope I can experience that kind of universal peace again. When I was younger, I had a lot of trouble sleeping, and would sleepwalk and have terrible night terrors. This happened for about 6 years of my early childhood. For a bit of context, my brothers all lived together in an apartment, or flat as we called them in England, which was only 2 floors and had about 6 people living in them. I don't remember exactly when it started, but I began having incredibly vivid dreams of dead people that were inside my house. From what I can remember, from my pea-sized brain, they wanted to communicate with me, but I couldn't understand. Many times, it would end up in a nightmare for me, and I would sleepwalk. However, I would run and scream up and down the halls like I was being chased by something. When I was awake, I wouldn't be able to walk down the hall by myself because of people I saw hiding inside of the rooms. It got to the point where my mum had a priest over to bless the home, and after a while I stopped seeing stuff, experiencing night terrors, and never slept-walked again. Turns out the apartment block was built on a graveyard. My dad died almost 3 months ago. About 6 weeks after he passed, I had a dream that I was doing laundry and talking to my mum on the phone. I was in our old house that no longer exists, but I was the age I am now and was talking to my mum because I knew she was lonely without my dad there. So in the dream, she has to step away from the phone for a moment, and a few seconds later I hear rustling, and then my dad say, "Hey baby girl, how are you doing?" Still dreaming, I just lost it completely, sobbing and managed to choke out, "I'm okay," and his response was, I just wanted to let you know that I love you and I miss you. And I responded that I loved him too and missed him too. That was it. A few days later, I finally tell my mum, because every time I thought about it, I started crying. And she said that she also had a dream about my dad, and that she came home and he was just sitting on the couch. She sat beside him and laid her head on his lap, something she never did. It was complicated, but my dad was gay. However, he and my mum were best friends and continued living together even after they separated. My dream was just so incredibly vivid and raw. I understood he was gone, and I have no doubt he stopped by to check in on me. It still hurts, but I'm sure someday I'll be glad to have had this dream. Both of our dreams happening so close just felt like maybe he was checking in on us. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I'm not crying, you're crying. Yeah, some of those stories were definitely hitting me in the feels. So yeah, very, very sad, very moving emotional stories today. Creepy and emotional. Although I didn't really want to put emotional in the title. Hope that's okay. But yeah, really sad stuff. Really makes you think about death, or me anyway. The reason I wanted to focus on dreams this week is because I kept having these dreams that people I know started dying, and I'd be crying in the dreams when it happened, and I'd wake up really scared, and I'd look over and I'd see my wife, and I'd feel this relief just wash over me, because I was like, oh, at least you're here. And then, look down at the foot of the bed, see the crib, see Pandora's still there, and it's like, oh, okay. It's all good. Not much to worry about. But yeah, and of course, in the morning just check that everyone in my family's okay. Which they always are. And the people involved in the dream. But yeah, it's been some pretty messed up dreams. And lots of nightmares as well, lots of terrible nightmares. I've never dreamt with a dead person, not as far as I believe. Not like these stories anyway. If any of you have ever had any horrific nightmares that have really, that really stayed with you from how scary they were, or anything creepy dream related happened, send it over to my email. It's Dream Week. Maybe it'll be featured at the end of the week, who knows? But get those stories in if you want them read. If you like the video, don't forget to drop a like, leave a comment with your thoughts, subscribe and press the bell icon if you're new, and if you haven't already, you might as well. To share your own stories, all you have to do is email me. The link is in the description. If you can't see it, you have to press see more in the description to see what I'm talking about. You can also post it to my Reddit. That works too, if you'd like to. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.